you have, a big island or whatever, and there's like towers and stuff. And you have this and that. But right, but you know that at no point is your player going to, go too far off the island. So let's say you want to make sure that like even if your player winds up all the way out here or all the way over here, or maybe they somehow teleport all the way up here, you still are able to put them back on the island. So this whole thing, right? This cube, that might be the size of your level, or the size, well, not even the size of your level. Like this is sort of, this thing can be considered the level, right? But this is the size of like how big the world is. And so if you get outside the world boundaries, you might have some sort of system that says, okay, you shouldn't be out here, you should be over here, so we're going to respawn you. So that's basically what a bounding box is, and you can put boundaries on all sorts of things. If you imagine something like a soccer pitch, uh, for you Europeans out there, football, um, you have soccer, right? And if I'm here, then I'm inside. If I'm here, I'm outside. Sort of, if we just imagine this as sort of the bounds, right? The soccer field is, this is all inbounds, this is all out of bounds. And then, you know, if I kick the ball out of bounds, there's a specific procedure for getting it back in bounds. That's basically what we do with bounding boxes, and you can do all sorts of things with them. So a common example is, let's say you have one section of your game here, and you have another section of your game here, and you want to separate them for some reason. You can think of this is a bounding box, and that is a bounding box. And usually these are in 3D, so just imagine these as just sort of big, and almost always they're rectangles. Uh, Big 3D shapes that hold stuff. And there's something called an axis-aligned bounding box. This is also pretty useful. So let's say you have a sphere, right? Now you have, let's say you have some other stuff, right? You have some other stuff in your level. Now because collision checking is one of the more expensive operations you can perform. You don't want to check this sphere with collision over here if you don't have to, or here, or here, or here, right? You want to have a small little area around the sphere, and if there's something in there, then you check collision, and if there's not, you don't. So that's called an axis aligned bounding box, and the reason it's called axis aligned is, right. So let's take this axis, right? So here's our axis aligned bounding. Well, here's our axis aligned bounding box. Pretend this is more precise, right? But let's say we have like a cube here and it's rotated. And then we have, some, maybe we have something here that it's colliding with, and maybe we have something here that's colliding with. Or well, there, let's say we have collision, so we're checking for collision, and this thing and this thing are both things that can collide with our box here. Now, we know because this axis aligned bounding box doesn't contain this thing that we don't even have to worry about it. So checking the axis aligned bounding box is very easy, but checking more precise collisions is harder. So we want to get rid of as much work as we can. And so we say this is the axis aligned bounding box, but we can see these aren't colliding. And that's a fast, easy way to do it. And because I'm working with Godot, Godot sort of has solved this already, but axis aligned bounding boxes are useful for a variety of things, and it's a good concept to understand because a lot of game development is using sort of the same tools over and over again, but sort of slightly different. So you can imagine this axis aligned bounding box as sort of the boundary of the world. So let's say you have a bunch of stuff in a level, and the axis aligned bounding box is sort of the total size of the level, kind of. How do I explain this? So if I have a really tall building and a really wide building, then the axis line bounding box, if their sum is going to be pretty big, um, because it's not worried about being perfectly accurate. It's just sort of a good summary of the the footprint of the thing. And then this axis line bounding box can be used as sort of a world boundary. So in our earlier example, we had this big level, and then or the big sort of world and the small level in the world. What we could do instead is just say, the axis line bounding box is based on all of the stuff in the level, and if you're even a little bit outside of that, then you're out of bounds. You should get back in. Hopefully that's all pretty clear. If you're confused, again, just think about soccer. Here's okay, so let's imagine for a second that in addition to you can get out of bounds this way and you can get out of bounds this way. Let's imagine that if the ball is more than 20 meters up in the air, it's also out of bounds. And so you can imagine pretty easily that our soccer goal, or our soccer thing, can form this sort of 3D shape that keeps everything, that basically determines whether the ball or players or whatever is where they should be inside the box or where they shouldn't be outside the box. And that brings us into our second topic, which is the kill plane. So remember how I talked earlier about bounding boxes and how we want to generally keep the player inside of the boundaries of the world. Here is how we enforce that. So this is something called an area 3D, and that's basically just and you can also think of this as a kill plane, right? So a kill plane is, and in this case it has depth, but don't worry too hard about that part. Okay. So this is not the plane you fly in. This is more like the plane in mathematics. So a plane in mathematics, it's infinitely wide. It's infinitely wide in all directions. And then if you think about it in 3D, it has an orientation, and then other planes will intersect it. So if you have another plane here, these two planes, this is a little hard to see, but you have a plane here, and it's represented by this shape, but it's actually infinite. And then we have this other plane here that intersects with it, and it's infinite in this other direction. Now, in computer graphics, it's very hard to work with infinity. So when we say plane, it's very much like sort of this infinite flat thing, but ours is finite. And so when we say a kill plane, that's basically, you can think of a bounding box as constructed, if you wanted to do it this way, because you don't have to. Very open-ended. But if you can think of it if you have your level and you want to get the player, make sure the player doesn't fall forever. You want to make sure they don't leave the level. You can construct a box out of kill planes, and then if they touch it, you do something to them. Usually you'll respawn them. So if we go back here into Godot, this blue thing here, so there's the collision shape, which is invisible, and the mesh instance. You don't need a mesh instance for an area 3D, but it makes it easier to see what's going on. And if we run the game, for the sake of argument, I've already set this up, but let's say I didn't. Let's go to this script. And, sorry. So this script doesn't do anything because what's actually happening is there's this thing connected here to my character body 3D script. And so when that happens, so basically when this detects a collision, it sends a signal over here. And then this says, okay, cool. Let's so here's our spawn point. So that's just this is just an arbitrary, here's where the player spawns. And so what happens when we run this script, when the script runs, which is what happens when the game starts. So on ready, which is it happens immediately when the game starts. It takes our cube's position spawns it here. And if we ever respawn it, if we do that, if the player falls off the level and we need to put them back, we have this function called respawn, which puts them back there. So a lot of this code is I used it in episode 1, given to us by the engine, but we can always mess with it. So for example, if I want to have our speed be 100, that's a change I can make, and now the game will probably not be very playable. Yep, there we go. Let's change that back to 5. But in this case, what I'm going to show you, and this is what I'm doing here. I think I discussed this earlier. I'm commenting out the code, so that code doesn't do anything. It's just sort of there for us humans to read. And now instead of respawning the player, I'm going to print collided. Alright, and then right here, what this is, I have a script that if the player's not on floor, if the player's not on a floor, I'm going to print their velocity. So anytime the player is falling, you'll be able to see this update, but now that I'm on the ground, it doesn't. And now if we fall off the level, you can see it just keeps going. And we can see in here somewhere. Yeah, and collide with something. Now, obviously, it's easier to, obviously, we would prefer that instead of just saying that you collided with something, we should do something about it. So what we're going to do instead of printing collide with something, we're going to get rid of this, and now we're going to call this function. So function is a bit of reusable code. So what this does is it just sets, usually your functions are going to be a little longer than 1 line, but now if I'm handing this project off to someone else, or I just forget stuff, because you'll forget stuff, even if you're on your own, I don't need to remember how this works. I can just use this function, and then it'll just work. And so in this case, what we're doing is, so see this right down here? This is what the player's position is if they're falling. So we can see here, it goes to about 15, and then stops. And so because we're basically we teleport the player, but we don't get rid of their momentum, so you're gonna fall a little faster. You're gonna keep falling until you hit the platform. And so what we could do is add a velocity equals vector 3.0. And so what that would do is if we fell off here, boom, and you can see that when we're landing, it's closer to 8 than to 15. And if we scroll off here, at some point it's going to be 0. Yeah, and so we were going to about negative 12.7, and then our velocity was reset, and then gravity took over. And it's sort of up to personal preference whether or not you want to do that. So that's trigger. Okay, right, triggers. So a trigger is just anything that can start a script from start code doing something. So, for example, right, and I was doing this for testing, but right. So, for example, now I've got this jump function, and what this is doing is it's waiting for me to press the spacebar. And if I do press the spacebar, then it's going to push me up in the air a little bit. And you can see our velocity is keeping track of that. And you can think of, and usually when you say trigger, it means something in the world or something like that. So this is waiting for something to happen. That thing triggers, and it has some effect in the world. And it's a very general term. So, all kinds of things can be triggers. For example, let's say these area 3Ds here, often they're invisible. So you could have sort of a secret trap, or if you walk in a certain area, it'll do something. All kinds of stuff. Because basically it's very easy to connect things like this area 3D to a script, and then that script can do whatever you want it to. I think that's all the concepts covered. So bounding boxes are things that you use basically to keep the player inside, or to measure the extent of a 3D object in sort of sometimes imprecise ways that makes it easier to do certain things. A trigger is just something that can cause code to run. And then a kill plane, we went over that, is this thing. So if you jump off of it, it's going to, if you jump off at a certain point, you hit the kill plane and it'll respawn you. And I could make this something else. If I instead had it play music or whatever, it would still be a trigger, because it's still something that's like, this thing in the game is tied to something that runs code. A kill plane is sort of a specific kind of thing, and we have a term for it because they're so common. Um, and so, if you fall off the level, it'll eventually kill you, because if not, your player just falls forever. And falling forever is not particularly entertaining, and most people who make games make them because they want their players to have fun. Okay. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that everyone learned something, and I will see you in the next one.